Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and once again I have a guest and I'm so happy about it. My good friend and the great friend of the show, Renee Johnston, is back. How have you been doing, Renee?
I, you know, my standard answer for most days is I am as well as capitalism allows. So we're gonna stick with that.
I know exactly what you mean there. I
Right.
am I lost my job in January. I have been out of work since trying to find work. I am half convinced. I don't have proof of it the way some of our mutual friends do, but I am half convinced that it's at least partially because of my politics. I'm sure somebody's finding this show online and saying, don't hire him. I
I
could be
can I
wrong.
can see it. I can see it though. I can see it.
I don't mean to be too paranoid, but it feels that way sometimes. Weird, but who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe I just
I
have
mean,
bad luck.
we're definitely all on the list and probably multiple lists. So
Now that's true. That is very true. I know there are lists out there. I know that they are rather aggressively pursuing the rich guy who gives PSL and its affiliate mass organization groups all its money.
yep.
Um,
And now BAP is
they are
on.
doing so. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, and BAP is on that list that they just released. Black Alliance for Peace is on the list. I mean, they've always
Yes,
been
it is.
quasi on the list, but they're fully on the list now.
Yes, they are. Yes, they're every mass mobilization org connected to PSL is on the list.
Yeah.
Um, which which is a big deal if you're involved in the Answer Coalition or Code Pink or Black Alliance for Peace or the People's Forum or one of several other things. You're in the crosshairs and you might not even know it yet.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
this
and this
happens.
but this is also what they do, right? Like part of the
Yeah,
strategy is create these create these things where people are afraid to do anything, right? So you see this
yes,
happening, and now you're afraid to go out. Now you're afraid to organize. Now you're afraid to talk to people. Now you're afraid, you know, and
but
and that's
but
that's the entire point of it.
let's analyze the risk they're taking though, because they're making a decision to make any sort of organizing for any sort of liberation or justice or peace anywhere in America the same as terrorism. With that kind of pressure, it feels like they're actually increasing the risk of people feeling like they need to do terrorist things because everything else is illegal anyway. If I'm going to go to prison for what I'm going to do, I'm going to make it count.
I mean, that certainly could be one pathway.
I'm not necessarily recommending this. I don't like violence, but at the same time, JFK said the people who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable.
Yeah.
And if they're really going to crack down on every political expression of dissent as terrorism, then is there really any disincentive for actual terrorism anymore if people are just going to get charged the same way no matter what? Are they shooting themselves in the foot?
Well, I don't know. So they're not, it's interesting because as I watch the platoons of white dudes with their faces covered up, even though, to my knowledge, there's like an actual ordinance against face coverings in DC, but we'll leave that alone. Right? Like, never mind the troop of white men with their faces covered up against the ordinance that's in place, but we'll let that lie. And so I wonder as that type of mobilization is allowed, because those folks are not exactly screaming, all hail to government policy either. So I'm trying to figure out, like, how does this work? Right? Like, how are they going to, that's the part of it that I'm trying to figure out how they're going to navigate.
That part sadly is fairly predictable. If you look, I'd intended to go with the French Revolution, but Weimar Republic is always a good grab these days too. If you look at the history of Weimar Germany, the Nazis had a paramilitary quasi-state or a paramilitary extra-state organization whose entire purpose was to serve as a paramilitary for the party. They called them the SA, which, Sturmableitung, which was German for stormtroopers. After Hitler was actually safely in power and didn't need a terrorist organization separate from the state, he folded everybody he trusted into the Schutzstaffel, the SS, and he murdered all his old SA people. And they called it the Night of the Long Knives. And he just killed all the thugs that weren't useful to him anymore.
Yeah, well, that's
and
a
fascinating
who
was useful was incorporated into
that's
the
a fascinating
state.
little that's a fascinating little tidbit. I didn't know about the Night of Long Knives.
Did you know about the Night of Long Knives?
I did not know.
So this is also a classic warning against red-brown coalitions, because though he was a fascist, the leader of the SA was one of the more Strasserite, hate the rich people, down with the ruling class kind of Nazis. And at least part of killing him off was making sure that you were getting rid of the actual revolutionary part of the Nazis and instead incorporating the counter-revolutionaries into the state. So at some point, you're going to see something like that, where the unapproved Nazis are taken out and all the approved Nazis are incorporated into the state somehow. That's my prediction if it gets that far.
That is fascinating. So the thing about these, these little platoons of white people who keep their faces covered is I always, like, I'm trying to, and this is just my own, like, I'm deeply interested in the psychology of people, right? And so I wonder all the time, like, in real life, what do these people do, right? Like, if you're so invested in white supremacy that you would make your way to Washington, D.C. to march around in circles with your face covered and your sunglasses and your hat, right? But you don't believe it enough. You don't believe in it enough for other people to know that that's what you believe in, right? Because you would just go out there, right? Like, the reason, and someone questioned and said, well, when people go to Palestinian protests, they cover. I'm like, yeah, because you're actually in danger of what the state is going to do to you if you are.
The Klan wore hoods from the beginning. The earliest iterations of the Klan, these sort of pro-slavery secret societies that existed before the Civil War and were devoted to things like secession, they wore masks and hoods and used all these secret quasi Masonic imagery too. Part of it is, yes, to hide your identity, but another part of it is is if nobody knows who you are, they can't trust any other person they meet, and they're going to be that much more scared. And of course, during actual Reconstruction, the Klan would frequently claim to be ghosts trying to scare people they thought were stupid because they used to be slaves.
Right. So I I knew that part of, and I don't know if that sound. I got to make sure there's like a weird back feed, and I don't know if it's me or what. But so I knew the Klan in part used the hood and robe as a scare tactic, right? And I've not done any research into this to know, but I also, if I remember correctly, part of it was because some of the Klansmen were business owners who relied on the very Black people that they were terrorizing, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want them to know that you're running around at night burning crosses, because
if you were in any way associated with the Reconstruction governments in the South that the Klan was originally organized against, then you certainly didn't want anybody to know you were connected with the Klan. They would arrest you and potentially worse, but most of the real bad terrorism was done by the Klan's folks, sadly.
Right. So I'm just curious. So, one of my theories is also that some of these people work jobs where they pretend that they don't mind Black people. Right.
Well, yeah. As for what they do in life.
Right. And so,
who goes Nazi
it's part of it also like, well, I don't want people to know I'm a racist. But these are the people that crack me up, because I'm like, if your life is so entrenched in a way that you don't want anyone to know that you're racist, shouldn't you be questioning your racism and if that's actually a viable plan for your future? Like, this is the part of it that cracks me up.
Even when you have a conversation with some jackass on social media who's using his real name and clearly, in theory, isn't afraid to be racist, sure, there are the guys who are blatantly racist, but how often do you see, well, I'm not racist, racism is bad, but what you're talking about isn't racist at all, with people who want you to think that there's a line that they'll draw somewhere that's bad, and that's racism, and racism is bad, and we all know what it is when we see it and it gets that far. But they nitpick that every actual example of racism crosses the line isn't racism. And that's just another form of wanting to wear a mask. They're racist, but they want you to think they're against racism, that they share a moral line with you, but that the moral line they share hasn't really been crossed the way you're saying. That's just another form of a hood, isn't it?
Yeah, that is absolutely. Absolutely.
Or, all the old school Republicans who say, well, racism isn't about policy or who gets hurt. Racism is the evil philosophy in people's hearts. And, this is going to sound, I guess, a little too forgiving in some ways, but honestly, up to a point, I don't care what's in people's hearts. I want them to not blow their neighbors up.
Right. And I also want them to not be supportive of a system that they are trying to imply is not racist, right? Because that's part of the problem too, is this consistent attempt to individualize racism. Like, it's only racism if, like, you say something to someone that's racist, right? Or if you do something or treat somebody a certain way because of your own ideas and beliefs, right? But you don't understand, at just like what you said, like this entire surrounding system that is built on a structure that requires racism to remain in place in order for it to continue. So
the reason that John Wesley Hardin, who allegedly killed 40 some men, was a hero to many people in Texas is because he started his career during Reconstruction, and he started his career by shooting black Reconstruction police. Because, and I think this is a good idea, it's a shame it didn't push far enough, but one of the things they did in Texas was they made the Texas Rangers, who were the state police before the Civil War, illegal. And they replaced them with a federal police force that was like 99% black. And they put them in charge of enforcing all the civil rights laws, which is absolutely the right way to do it if you're giving them institutional backing and enough guns. But then, of course, John Wesley Hardin becomes a hero for terrorism against the anti-secession cops. And we make these heroes out of these people because when the system tries not to be racist or someone tries to reform the system, the people invested in the system revolt. Literally, like the Civil War, in little ways, like the John Wesley Hardins and Jesse James after the Civil War, who were people who sympathized with the losing side and wanted revenge. And we don't seem to take account. We don't seem to count violence the same way, depending on who does it. You don't see lots of white people making a hero out of Railroad Bill the way they made a hero out of John Wesley Hardin, even though Railroad Bill, a black ex-con who hitched rides on trains and got into gunfights with cops, was a much more heroic figure. The wrong people have a license to commit violence under our system.
Right. And those are also, and this is, again, this is my own fascination with trying to understand other people's psychology, right? So when I hear, and I do a lot of doom scrolling on Instagram, I try to make sure that I don't do it like daily, because that's like my marker. If I doom scrolled yesterday, then definitely cannot doom scroll today. And I like when I forget to doom scroll. So like a couple of days go and I'm like, oh, I haven't doom scrolled in a while. I can doom scroll. Yes. And so you encounter some really odd things in these social media spaces. And so, this new phenomenon with like these recorded debates and recorded like one-on-one conversations between people where they're trying to prove each other wrong or whatever. And I did see a fascinating one between, it was just a clip, and I will never watch the full conversation because I just don't have that much of an interest in like listening to a liberal and a racist talk, because they just don't even understand how similar they are. But, so they were talking about Preddy in Minneapolis and his murder by ICE, Alex Preddy. And the woman was saying like, well, like he wasn't important and he was a waste, and you don't go to a protest with a gun and blah, blah, blah. So the guy said to her, well, did you support Kyle Rittenhouse? Right. And she was like, well, yeah, he was just a kid. And it was just right. The mental gymnastics that these people are able to do in order to accommodate their own racism. Right. And then like even the willingness of the liberal to have a conversation with this person.
Yeah.
And like, where are we going with this? And what is the purpose of it? You know what I mean?
Well, I can think of a few reasons to have those conversations, but the only reasons to have those conversations are in spaces where where you're controlling the perception, it's really not a good idea to give up control in any way if you're talking to somebody like that. And you can't take anything but a hostile tack. My former host co-host back in the day once got tricked into debating a Nazi on their live stream, and he figured the only thing that he could do was, I kind of have to do it, but I'm going to do it wearing a banana costume. And so it became all about this guy in a banana costume and not about the Nazis framing.
Right. And then what's the point?
Exactly. And there are only so many ways you can handle it. You can't really engage with Nazis in any democratic sort of way, because if they don't get their way, they're just going to try to take everything over anyway. Which is the big lesson that people should have learned from the whole January 6th garbage, which is that people aren't just going to leave power because they lose an election, which is also why it was so disgusting to see Biden just hand everything over and be nice to the incoming Trump administration in 2024. It's like, you specifically
which no one should be surprised happened.
No, but of course not. But at the same time, you're telling us that you're going to fight fascism, and we elect you, and now you're just meekly giving up office to a fascist and being nice about it. Oh, this is how we do things in the U.S. when we win elections. Well, clearly that kind of good example from Obama didn't make Trump a better person before. Let's remember that. Obama was Obama and Michelle were when they go low, we go high people. Only
right. And he was also
them.
we can't force anything through. We have to work with those to get across the aisle. So
we can't prosecute our political enemy. That's the one that really got me. We can't prosecute our political enemies. So he made them his political friends instead. The worst part was, what's his name? Mr. Torture, John, CIA guy, whose name I can't remember right now, but I should remember because it's the same as somebody else. But he brought the CIA torture guy into his own administration and made him even more important, promoted him.
Right. Right.
And it's just like, wow. It was only because Trump was president at the time that the Democrats were able to rally to stop the torture lady from being made deputy director of operations or something like that.
Right. And they've done a real bang up job so far in this current administration of doing anything useful. They've been super.
Everything the Democrats did to make cops heroes after January 6th has been used by Trump as some sort of anti-left bullshit since he took power, which some of us said was going to happen in the first place. That nothing good's going to come of making cops heroes when the police unions all support Trump. Nothing's good is going to come of giving cops more money when the cops already support Trump. It's like, where do they think the money for the fascists comes from? And let's be honest, that's what a lot of people do these people do in real life, and that's why they're wearing masks, because they're cops, just like many of the January 6th protesters.
And I'm still trying to, I don't doubt that a lot of them are. Like, it wouldn't surprise me. Let me not. But I also wonder how many of these people are just like regular ass white dudes who feel like their lives should be better, they should have more, they should whatever. and
so
it's
when we're
everybody
talking
else's
about a
fault that they
regular
don't have it.
dude, when we talk about a regular ass white dude, and I this actually raises an interesting topic, because this feeds back into the whole wonderful drama over Graham Plattner that we saw. And notice that, like I said, after they dropped Plattner, they found someone who actually had the same politics in the same primary without all the baggage. But their whole insistence on Plattner in the first place was that these people in the media and in Justice Democrats were convinced Plattner was this great example of a regular white guy. But you look at who he was, and he was not just a veteran, but a former mercenary. The guy who owns the oyster boat, not a fisherman who works the oyster boat, the guy who owns the oyster boat, and technically, apparently owns the oyster beds as well. He's not even just an oyster fisherman, he's an oyster farmer, which is an important difference. And it's like, how is this guy a regular white guy in any way? How many regular white guys are ex-mercenaries with Nazi tattoos? I mean, is it really as bad as the so-called progressives want us to think, that Plattner was supposedly the best we could do in Maine? It doesn't seem to be, because they found somebody just as good as soon as they got rid of him.
Right. And I was, so I was never, I had not fallen into the, Plattner's the great white hype trap. So I was not impressed by him in any way, shape, or form. But
probably taken by the Nazi tattoo.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who goes that far, because I mean, I have tattoos, and I gotta say,
yeah,
if you go far enough as to actually like imprint something on your body that can never go away without like extreme measures, it's probably a bad sign if it's something that you're questioning later, right?
It's really important to interrogate the official story. I've said this on social media. I don't know if I've said it on the air or not, so I want to make sure I say it on the air at least once. So even here in the US, where there aren't any laws against it, you have to find a tattoo shop that's willing to give you a Nazi tattoo. More than half of the tattoo shops out there won't do it, and will in fact insult you and be mean to you if you ask for one. Worth knowing.
Right.
But even more,
right.
He was in Croatia when he got this tattoo. Croatia, unlike many other countries in the world, because former communists, some laws left over even after the Yugoslavian breakup, Croatia has denazification laws. The Totenkopf is illegal to display or put on someone as a tattoo in Croatia. So in order to get this tattoo where he was, he had to find a tattoo artist willing to break the law to give someone a Nazi tattoo. That's something you have to look for. It's not something you just casually find on a lark.
So see, that is like, so again, because I was not really paying him too much attention, I had no idea about that. So that to me adds another layer to the extremity like of this entire situation. But outside of that, the reason that I was like, I'm not paying this guy any little bit of attention as something that's going to be beneficial to people is because he made it very clear that his overarching goal in running for this Senate seat was to ensure that the Democrats had enough seats to do the things that the Democrats wanted to do. Yeah, right? He was very, very clear about that.
Majority, yeah.
Right. And so if his goal for his campaign is to provide the ability for the Democratic Party, which has proven to only be interested in being just enough to the left of the Republicans that they can say they're not Republicans, even if they're so far right of center that they might as well be, right? Like if your goal is to give them enough ability to do the things that they want to do, and nothing that they want to do is actually going to impact the material conditions of regular working people, even if you, as you claim to be a regular working person, then I have no interest in what you're bringing to the table. So this was why I really paid him no attention, was because he was very clear that his intention was to be a puppet for the Democratic Party.
I paid attention to the push for his candidacy on social media. And the reason I did that was because it was very obvious who was doing it. There is an account on Twitter now called Track APAC, which individually does decent work talking about who's taking money from APAC and under what forms. But I found out that the Track APAC account is run by someone we both know who used to work at Brand New Congress, who several people have privately told me they thought was a terrible racist person, and who fired a woman of color in order to give herself the woman of color's job at Brand New Congress.
No, she is. That's who's running that site?
That's who's running the Track APAC Twitter account anyway.
No,
that's who's running the Track APAC account. What's more, the Track APAC account and Ryan Grimm were specifically involved in what can only be called a really nasty attempt to smear a progressive Democrat in San Francisco as being pro-Israel because she was running against Saikat Chakrabarti, AOC's former chief of staff. And the Track APAC account specifically outed this progressive Democrat in San Francisco, Connie Chan, as taking money from a PAC aligned with APAC in order to push this notion that only their guy was the pro-Palestine guy in the race. She won the primary anyway. It's going to be her and another pro-Israel Democrat named Scott Wiener. And Track APAC then had to do this whole big thing where they rehabilitated the Democrat they had initially attacked, because now they found themselves in a situation of being up against a real pro-Israel Democrat. And it's just hilarious to see the about face when they were so willing to smear someone as pro-Israel for their guy. But now that they're in the primary, they're in the general election with the actual pro-Israel candidate, now they can't say that anymore. And it's like, will they have done real harm to this race as a result? Will they get one more pro-Israel Democrat in Congress because of this? I mean, it's like the Graham.
But in the end, isn't that their actual, like, that's their actual goal, right? Like, the goal is not to have.
Well, it's worth noting that when Brand New Congress first started in 2016, that they asked Plattner to run then, and he said no. And he supposedly said no again in 2020 when they asked him to run for Congress. And so I don't know why he said yes in 2026 when he hadn't said yes before, except for somehow I guess he thought Trump being elected would make his Nazi past okay. Which then, of course, is, that's what everybody tried to do. It's okay that he might have been a Nazi once. Trump is obviously worse, and he's not a Nazi now. And there was also something from Matt Stoller that was echoed by Ken Klippenstein and Ryan Grimm, that what Plattner represented to them was the defeat of HR lady politics.
Hmm.
And Stoller phrased it that way, not defeating some sort of political correctness, but literally, we're going to defeat HR lady politics. And that phrasing
really
seems important.
I think you're right. That phrasing does seem important. That's a fascinating way to put that.
Klippenstein made a big deal of quitting The Intercept because his editor was fired. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
So back channels at The Intercept at the time told me that the real reason the editor was fired is that several women in the workplace had accused him of being creepy. Klippenstein did not share that fact.
Well,
when
no. Why would
he was quitting in solidarity with his editor, he claimed his editor was being censored.
Well, there's always these little backstories that we don't find out about until long after the fact, right?
Well, I knew about this backstory at the time. Because on my old account, I was mutuals with a few people at the one that got hacked. I was mutuals with a few people at The Intercept. And I asked them some questions about what was going on. And while nobody really wanted to go on the record, people who knew what was going on said, hey, yeah, women accused the editor of being creepy. And that was why he was fired. There wasn't any other reason for it. There wasn't anything about anything that Ken Klippenstein had punished that the staff at The Intercept didn't like. He was let go because women accused him of being creepy, and it held up well enough that they felt they should let him go. And let's note that that the purpose of HR lady politics, if we're going to use that phrase, is to make sure that people in that situation either don't get fired or get fired quietly so no one hears about it. And the only reason that people were telling me this and making sure not to go on the record about it was because there was some reason that The Intercept, had agreed not to say we fired him for being a creep, right? That's the only reason you don't say that on the record. The Intercept is preventing you somehow.
Right.
So if you keep
which
that
always
in mind,
means, of course, but that also means that The Intercept is complicit with what's happening, right?
It does.
Like,
it does mean that The Intercept is complicit in what's happening. As a capitalist institution, it has to be, no matter how good and well-meaning its individual reporters and editors and managers are. It is ultimately a capitalist institution that exists in order to be able to serve a specific group of funders as a write-off, and if that funding goes away and they don't pull in enough money from subscriptions, that's the end of The Intercept. So that's how the system works. The Intercept becomes complicit. People don't know why the editor was let go. In this case, the editor is working with Klippenstein on his Substack, but I don't know who else they're employing or whether they have research assistants or anything like that. So potentially it's still a dangerous situation for someone, since I don't know what the managing organization for that Substack is. If it's just Ken and the editor, maybe nobody's getting hurt. But if they're involving other people, then, Ken's putting people at risk in that situation, knowing what happened at the last place. And the Intercept helped cover it up.
Which they're going to do because, for as much as they like to call themselves independent, they are fully embedded within the mainstream system. They're only just a little bit better.
Beyond all that, let's look at what I would call systemic guardrails. So now, obviously, Gretchen Whitmer and Dana Nessel in Michigan are not wonderful people. I'm not going to try to pretend they are. But the reason that the lawsuit against the criminal charges against Rick Snyder and other people formerly involved in the government of Michigan during the Flint catastrophe, the reason nobody was ever actually charged or indicted or prosecuted in the end was because the Attorney General's office wrote a memo that Nessel as AG and Whitmer as governor accepted that basically said we can't prosecute these people because if we convict them, then Michigan will be liable for a massive number of lawsuits that will do tremendous damage to the state, and we can't put ourselves in that situation. So liability, which shouldn't be the government's biggest concern when it comes to doing the right thing. They shouldn't worry about whether or not the state of Michigan gets sued. The whole point is if these people are guilty of crimes, they're guilty of crimes. The state, by prosecuting them, is saying these are the people you should be suing. Now you can say yes, but this is the whole thing, is that it becomes all about this liability shield for the state to not prosecute. And crime goes unpunished. People are still sick. People are still dying. They haven't cleaned up the water. There are still people who are using Brita filters every day, and that may not even be enough.
Oh, it's definitely not enough. It's 100% definitely not enough.
And we also know that this wasn't the Flint, Michigan problem. There were lead scandals in school districts all over the country. And I'm just talking about Flint. I'm talking about rich white people's schools. And even that shit was covered up because they certainly don't want rich white people suing them. And it's like, how much is any of our water safe? And the answer is, we don't know, which means probably not. We could all have lead poisoning. We talk about long COVID a lot, and I believe a lot of the long COVID conspiracy theories about why everybody is more tired all the time. But I mean, we could also all be seeing impaired function in our 40s and 50s instead of our 60s and 70s because of lead poisoning. How would we know?
Yeah. That's true. But it's like anything else here, right? So we talk all the time about, well, you and I don't talk all the time about, we probably should talk more about this, FYI. Just a side note. But I feel like I talk all the time in various places about how we live in a place that genuinely is set up, to be counterproductive to our basic needs and requirements to survive, right?
Yeah.
And so
this is something I think everybody talks about on some level, whether it's the basic capitalist stuff or the nastier or white supremacist patriarchal stuff that the capitalism depends on.
Right. So, so the question of the day is like, at what point do people understand that all of these, these issues that occur with regard to water, to air, to when they, decide they're going to build a highway through a town, or when they put up a data center, like all of these things they all backtrack to the same central issue, which is that we live in a place where no one actually cares about our general health, right? Because the most profitable thing with regard to people's health in this particular country is treating illness, right? It's not prevention of illness. It's not healing of illness. It's not eradication of illness. It's not curing of illness. It is treating illness. So in order to maintain the ability to treat illness, you have to keep people sick. Right? Because that's where the money is.
This is why the Joe Biden's cancer moonshot has been a complete failure, despite Biden becoming president and having even more and having actual power to do something. Is that ultimately the whole medical establishment makes too much money from cancer to want to cure it. If we had Cuba's lung cancer treatment, what would the Mayo Clinic do? It's ridiculous. And then the whole COVID thing, where landlords realize, oh my God, we don't have people coming into work to fill the offices. People are paying us rent, and they're going to stop paying us rent. They're not going to keep paying rent for all this office space if we don't do something to get people back into the office. And a whole lot of the religious truth of COVID precautions was thrown out of the window all at once. This was reported on very heavily at the time by Walker Bragman about how, the landlords were deliberately wanting everybody to get back to work because they were losing too much money off COVID countermeasures. And the landlords got their way anyway. The landlord's version of COVID has become the truth, and people who have been trying to report more truthfully have been chased out of the mainstream media. The Atlantic fired Ed Yong, their COVID guy. And it never stops. People are still dying of COVID, by the way.
Oh, yeah, consistently. I literally have a friend who was just hospitalized with COVID. Like, literally just got out of the hospital like days ago for something that they claimed ended, 4 years ago? Yeah. It was supposed to be done. We were supposed to be over with COVID.
Yeah. I have friends who I'm pretty sure are dead now. I haven't heard from them since for a very long time, and it's very depressing. I don't know for sure, but the one, and it's really depressing because in 2020, this was the friend that I started the little chat window that became chat group that became Progressive Wave 20 with Katrina. Last I heard from her, she was sick with COVID and homeless, and I haven't heard from her since. And that years ago, she's probably dead. It's like, how am I supposed to process that? How is her family supposed to go on with that? And people don't know, and I don't know for sure. There's not really a way to find out without violating a whole bunch of people's privacy. It's like, I'm getting off topic now. Sorry. But you're right.
No worries on that. But it just occurred to me, do we want to talk at all about, we didn't even get to liberalism, and
we should actually get to liberalism. Then the question becomes, well, what is liberalism going to do about all this?
Nothing. The answer is nothing.
Reform. One of my favorite facts of liberalism is that John Stuart Mill, who literally wrote the book on liberalism, it's called On Liberty. John Stuart Mill, at the end of his life, was corresponding with Karl Marx and calling himself a socialist because he did not believe that the liberal way of approaching things would actually help anyone in the end. It was too tied to big business. But this is the guy who wrote the book on liberalism, literally. So the best thing that you can say about liberalism is that it got rid of kings and put a general idea out there that aristocracy is bad. But then it ate itself up. It ate itself up for a lot of different reasons, but ultimately because what I would call the liberal class, which is a combination of both bourgeois landlords who think like professionals and professionals with a great deal of clout in their organizations sort of found how good liberalism could work for them as a way of getting rid of kings and aristocracies, but still keeping hierarchies in place. The liberalism of the French Revolution got rid of the kings and elected a national assembly, but it was the period of armed, organized power being wielded by the mob that was actually revolutionary. There was a liberal government that was elected when the French Revolution was complete. It was called the Legislative Assembly. The members of the National Directory, who had run the actual overthrowing of the king, passed what they called the self-denying ordinance that said nobody in the National Directory could serve in the Legislative Assembly. This was a brilliant thing because it took the leaders of the revolution and kept them from being associated with the state right away. And instead, they formed the Paris Commune and associated themselves directly with the armed sans-culottes who controlled the city. And so you had two centers of power. You had the liberal government, which was passing laws and running things on a day-to-day basis, and had the Paris Commune, which was cutting off their heads if they started to talk about bringing the king back. And it's really important to understand that the leaders of the revolution were associated with the Paris Commune and not the Legislative Assembly. The Legislative Assembly was run by all these liberal people who wanted to make nice with the king and who wanted to distract from the domestic issues in France by internationalizing the revolution and invading Belgium. So by not associating with themselves with the state, the leaders of the revolution were able to not be associated with the immediate failures of the state and were able to overthrow the liberals too. And ultimately, the French Revolution broke down when Robespierre decided he was going to disarm the sans-culottes in order to take full power over the government for his group of supporters. And as soon as armed sans-culottes were gone, he couldn't stop the liberals from killing him and taking over again. And so all of these attempts to associate themselves with the government ended in failure for the revolutionaries. The most successful part of the revolution was when they deliberately and intelligently kept themselves out of the government so they could keep being revolutionary. They understood that someone needs to keep pushing the liberals, that without that radical push, liberals are just conservatives. And that's all the way back in the revolution.
So that's great. So basically what you're saying is this is what they've always been. And nobody should be surprised that they continue to be this way. That's the crux of it, right? Like, which is the same as trying to explain to people that the real problem with the Democrats is they understand that they only have to remain just to the left of the Republicans. And it doesn't matter how far to the right both of them are, as long as they are just to the left of the Republicans.
It's also important. There's also a lesson there about winning revolutions. Winning a revolution isn't just taking over the government, because once you control the state, you're now responsible for the state, and you're now thinking about all sorts of things you were never worried about as a revolutionary, because it wasn't your problem. there has to be some sort of tension between the people, and by the people, I mean, I'm going to say it, the armed mob and the government, in order for revolutionary change to continue. When the revolutionaries take over the state, they become the state, they get the baggage of the state, and they inherit the hierarchy of the state. You see this similarly in the Russian Revolution, where until they actually take over the government, the Bolsheviks are really, really good at doing things. And when it actually comes to the point where they take over the government and start integrating themselves into the state, that's when you start to end up with people not wanting to take responsibility, and ultimately this sort of Stalinistic bureaucracy that while it still achieved a great many good things when compared to the West, ultimately was more about preserving its own existence as a class than about, making things better for the masses as a whole. You have to have some sort of, I think, when Trotsky was talking about a permanent revolution, too many people have seen it as international revolution, going to war with everyone and making every place not capitalist. But the biggest and most fundamental part of the permanent revolution is that the people running the revolution have to keep running a revolution with the idea of changing society, and can't take over the government themselves without completely losing the revolution part of it. And people don't want to learn this lesson. When you take over the government, you ultimately become liberal at best and reactionary at worst. And it's a thin line, because liberals are conservatives and conservatives are reactionary.
A very thin line. It's a very thin line.
And every sort of liberal change that ever came to be, pre-Cold War, Cold War, anything good we can think of after the Cold War, usually on a local level, but some things are better than others. In order for good things to happen, either someone has to make money off it, or people have to be scared about what will happen if they don't do it. Those are the two ways change happens. Someone makes money from it, or people are too scared of what will happen if they don't do it. These are the iron laws of the state almost. And maybe I'm getting too anarchistic about this, but I think it's something that really has to be considered closely when you watch how states behave and how ruling classes behave, whether they're necessarily the capitalist ruling class or not, if you follow me. And I think that liberalism ultimately breaks down in the idea that, well, we need to have private property and rich people in order to build up society, but then we have to redistribute the wealth of the rich people to the rest of society in order to make life better, but we have to do it in a way that the rich people are okay with. And is that really a recipe for making?
I don't know if it, I mean, no. I don't think so.
It doesn't sound like it to me too. You have to have pressure groups. When we're protesting and we stop protesting because Joe Biden wins an election, we're dissipating all our power. I mean, let's remember 2020 for a moment. Despite COVID, people were in the streets engaged in a serious uprising against the police. And it was that serious uprising against the police more than anything else that drove Joe Biden to the White House. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. Yes.
And once people were not protesting anymore because Joe Biden was safely in power, Joe Biden starts doing a whole bunch of pro-cop stuff. And nobody protests that, really. I mean, not in the same way that they had been uprising against the cops while Trump was president. And the cops are still the same cops. Joe Biden's still giving them the same money. The Democratic politicians who called the National Guard out against the people of Minneapolis and Minnesota were running for president in 2024. Well, vice president, but still. It's the state is almost a trap. Power is almost a trap. When somebody like ContraPoints gets up in front of a camera and says, well, the left doesn't actually want power. They want to critique it endlessly. No, we are critiquing the state. We want power. We know power is necessary to get things done, but that power has to come from the people in their councils. If the people are not willing to fight for something in the end, it won't happen. And liberalism, maybe I'm wrong, liberalism seems to have reached a point where we're now telling people it's wrong to fight for everything, just trust politicians to.
Right.
And that's not even how liberalism worked.
Exactly.
They had to fight for liberalism in France, in Mexico, everywhere. You know that when Mexico passed their big liberal reform bill, there was immediately a war with the conservatives who tried to overthrow the government.
I'm waiting for the like sometimes.
No, sorry.
So a lot, so much of this, because I did, I read your articles when they come out.
Sure.
Because I'm always interested. You're always such a great history lesson for me. And so part of my struggle all the time with having conversations with other people is trying to get them to really understand like the root of these problems, right? So
yes,
that believing that reform is going to work in a system that was built initially on all of the wrong things, right? Understanding that Democrats are only going to go but so far, because in the end they're two cheeks of the same ass, right?
Yeah.
Understand, like, all of these things. Like, what is the if there is one, right? What is the simple way of getting people to understand that they are living in a place that is intentionally duping them into believing that there is some side of this system that exists that could actually work for people, when there is no side of the system that exists that can actually work for people?
This is why Plato created the metaphor of the cave. I'm not a big Plato fan. I'm not a big fan of the underlying politics of the Republic, which are proto-fascist. But in the Republic, Plato says, he's talking about philosophers and everyone else. He's being intellectually elitist, but there's some truth in this too. Plato says that people live inside a cave, and the cave is lit by a fire, and the fire lets them see a little bit about what's going around in the cave, but it also casts all these big shadows on the wall, and they can't always tell the difference between what's really happening in the cave and the shadows are on the wall. If somebody goes outside of the cave, they can't see anything because they're used to the fire in their eyes all the time, and they have to get used to the natural light. If someone stays outside and learns what it's like outside, their eyes have gotten used to the light, and they go back into the cave. Now it's too dark. The fire's not bright enough. There's too many shadows. Now they can't see. And they're trying to explain to everybody what's outside versus what's inside. But they're blind in the cave after having gone outside, while the people in the cave don't know what's outside because they're blind if they leave the cave. Now, I don't ultimately agree with the intellectual elite aspect of this, but the problem of the cave does sort of come to this idea of truth versus not truth. If your society, and in this way, let's call society the cave. If society is the cave, and you step out of the cave to critique society, then the people in the cave think you're critiquing them. And when you come back in, they blame you. And you can't see in the cave. Why should we believe you can see outside the cave? Plus, once you're inside the cave, and this is a good example for people getting power, once you're inside the cave, your eyes are getting used to the light inside the cave again. And the more time you spend in the cave, the harder it is to come back out of the cave again. And if you want to look at everything in sort of cycles, you've got a series of caves, an endless nesting Russian doll of caves. Congress is a cave. The people in Congress feel they're being criticized by everyone outside the cave whenever people don't like Congress. The government as a whole is a cave. The people in the government feel they're being criticized by people outside the cave when the government gets criticized, and so on. And this endless cycle of caves is much more disorienting than the one cave that Plato draws in the Republic. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. It's actually a really good analogy. You should. Have you thought about writing it out in that way? Because
I need to write some of this stuff out.
Yeah, because I actually really, I really like the analogy of, because that it's when you are just like we are living in the belly of the beast, and it's people who live within the belly of the beast who are essentially, I mean, yes, we're impacted by the things that our governmental structure does around the world, vis-a-vis high gas prices, you know, stock shelves being empty, that type of thing. But we're not, I don't think people here.
Every conflict on social media between people outside the imperial core and people inside the imperial core, about people outside the imperial core talking bad about all Americans or Black Americans or Latino Americans, a lot of this ends up being what I'm talking about. The people being criticized are inside the cave, being criticized by people outside of it, and feel defensive rather than listening. Whether the criticism is right or wrong, if you feel defensive about it, you're not really listening.
And that, you know, it's so funny you just made that comparison, because I was just saying to my husband the other day that the only white people in the room who get offended by conversations about racism are the racists, right? Because if you know you're not racist, you don't get offended by these conversations. You just recognize that this is the reality that most people are living within, right? And it doesn't bother you. Like, you're okay to participate in these conversations. You're okay to respond. You're okay to be like a reasonable person who can just say like, yeah, I see that shit too. Like, it's crazy, versus being like, well, what do you mean? Why don't like, you know what I mean?
I'm by no means friendly with Tim Black anymore. We used to be friendly back in 2020, but we went our separate ways over the years. But he said one thing that will always stick with me, which is, and he was talking to me when he said this, and he said, nobody said get the white guy out of the room when John Brown came into the room, because because people understood that when John Brown came into the room, he was on their side and not the other white people's side. And in the end, he got killed for it.
Exactly.
And if you're really on somebody's side, you're not the people they're complaining about. I mean, if somebody was going on about, oh, these white liberals, they don't want to get their hands dirty, John Brown would be like, well, all right, I better get my hands dirty then. I think there's some real truth in a sort of aspiration. Most white people should aspire on some level to be more like John Brown than Abraham Lincoln. That's how I
definitely. Definitely. One of our cohorts, Jackie Lukman, has written a book that is in basis about John Brown and why there needs to be more John Browns. That I wish I had thought. I wish I knew the conversation was going to go this way, because I would have brought the link with me. But I'll email it to you, and maybe you can just add it to the show notes or whatever.
I hadn't even planned to mention John Brown. It only came up because we talk about white people being offended. It's like, if you're on somebody's side, there's no reason to be offended. You're absolutely right.
Yep. Always.
I know that we've been talking for more than an hour now, and usually you like to keep it about an hour. So do you have any final thoughts?
Mostly, so one, for the people who come across this, try and support my friend Chris here, because I mean it when I say it. Like, I always learn. So this is why I get distracted. Like, I was supposed to remember at 11:56 to be like, I've got like 5 more minutes, and I'm so busy listening to you and enjoying the conversation, I lost track of time. But I don't want the world to lose you in this space. So I do hope that people will support you, because I think it's important to keep you going, right? Also, if folks are interested in what we're doing over on Black Liberation Media, my show is Saturdays at 11. We go into a plethora of conversations about different things. But this last one, and maybe I'll connect you to these kids, because it was such a fascinating conversation. They went on a delegation to Bolivia, and they had the opportunity to meet with the coca farmers, and to meet with the women revolutionaries, and to meet with Evo. And it was fascinating. And I actually thought of you while we were talking to them, because I know you're so deeply invested in understanding how revolution truly works, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought of you. So I'll reach out to them and see if I can connect you all, because I think you'd enjoy that conversation.
That would be awesome. I fully admit, and this goes out to everybody else who knows anybody they think they want to hook me up with. Since my personal account got hacked last year, I have been trying to rebuild my show book. When my original show account also got hacked, that sent me back even more. So, if you know of somebody who'd like to come on the show, or you yourself are an activist who would like to come on the show, please don't be afraid to reach out to me on Twitter at Eclectic Rad Show, or on Blue Sky at Eclectic Radical. You can also find me on Patreon, YouTube, and what's the other one? Substack as Eclectic Radical. And yes, we can definitely use the support. I would like to stay on the air. I want to thank Renee for remembering that. My final thought, and I want to say this again, and Renee mentioned Kyle Rittenhouse earlier. Kyle Rittenhouse brings a lot of thoughts to me, so many different things all at once. What criminal records mean about people, what mental illness means about people, what side people take on a protest means about people. But when you understand that the reason Kyle Rittenhouse gets away with this stuff is because everybody is pretty much convinced that he was acting as a cop. And that's why he was allowed to get away with what he did and found not guilty. Whereas the George Floyd protests themselves were about anger at the cops doing something obviously inappropriate. You can start to see where the problem is. For anybody who deep down really supports the cops, even if you're angry about what Derek Chauvin did, what Kyle Rittenhouse did was still necessary to protect the institutions of society against the lawless rioters. Society needs to be protected by the state. The rioters are the people trying to protect society. The fascists are the cops. The fascists are the threat to society. The fascists are the people telling you to lie down and die instead of speaking up for yourself. And this is really where we are. We're at the point where people are being told to die rather than speak up for themselves on issues like homelessness and COVID and poverty and healthcare and cops. And our society is not going to be able to continue to go on this way indefinitely. Either capitalism and this society that is killing us is done, or we're done. They used to say back in the 50s is this whole, yeah, let's push the button. Better dead than red. No. As I get closer to 50 years, I understand I like being alive and I want to be alive. And definitely better red than dead. And that's my final thought for the day myself. Better red than dead. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I'm glad Renee stayed with us a bit. I'm sorry she had to run when she did, but she has a real life too. I'll let everybody else get back to their real life. I hope to be back next week, and until then, I'll tweet at you.